Welcome, you guys.
Howdy.
Awesome. So this one today is all about having a little bit more fun. This podcast is about getting back to our playful roots. So in that vein, we're going to play a game today called Would You Rather. It's going to be a little bit different, but hopefully, like I said, it'll be some fun. It's a common game. It puts people in boxes, which is not what we want to be about at all. But I think it'll be cool because we're going to come at this game from a bioenergetic point of view. So it'll give listeners and even ourselves to kind of reiterate what that means in the vein of the game Would You Rather. Before we get going in the game, though, I just want to check in with you guys. We're living in crazy times right now. Danny, how about you first? How's everything going?
Yeah, so I'm in this madness. I've been in Thailand the whole time, and it's just been a wild ride. I'm not kidding you. When I arrived in Bangkok, I only planned to be there for like a week or two. And when I arrived, I was like, man, if anything goes down, this is like the worst place to be imaginable. And I mean, that's what happened. So nothing got really that crazy despite being so close to China and things. I thought the US was actually experiencing worse problems. And there's like white people, I think it's males, are called farangs here. And there's like a memo being passed around by the Thai minister. And he's saying that farangs are carrying coronavirus. And so I'll be like walking through the grocery store and people will be dodging me, like running in different directions. And so it's really a spectacle of just, I don't know what it is. It's just crazy.
Well, hopefully don't turn on the white foreigners because you'll be it will not be a pleasant situation. I'm not in our situation here is not that bad. I mean, nobody's chasing us in the store, but DC is under quarantine just like everybody, all the large big major cities in the States, and we're starting to see some lines forming in front of like big grocery stores, and they're letting people in at certain numbers. I think they kind of like calculate the area of the store, the open area, and then you have to be like 6 feet apart from another person, right? So you calculate the area of that circle and then divide the area of the store by that circle. That's what the guard was telling me. And you kind of arrive at the a number of how many people should be in the store. But it's creating, I think this is pushed to the extreme because they've somehow artificially low. I mean, they've come up with a smaller area for the store, and now you're seeing like an entire Whole Foods store. It's got like 5 people inside, and there's a massive line outside of people who are coughing and sneezing in each other's faces, and the wind is blowing in all directions. And I'm thinking, you just created this health nightmare here. Just let people inside and shop, and they'll just leave and go about their business. There's no need to create like an artificial health disaster, and that's exactly what's happening. But anyways,
intensify the psyop.
Exactly. And the cops are finally starting to wear masks. And I saw basically they were trying to arrest somebody on the street, and the cops wouldn't go near that person because the person was coughing. So they called the ambulance, and then the ambulance people came out in these hazmat suits, and then they tackled the person. And the cops were they were just sitting around and like kind of making sure that the person doesn't fight back or something. But I mean, it was obvious that the guy was not in a good condition, and they kind of like took him into the ambulance, and the ambulance left, and the police followed it. But the police themselves did not handle the person on the ground. So, yeah,
I heard about a guy in Malibu who was surfing by himself. Did you guys hear that?
Oh yeah, he got arrested because he was violating the crowd rule. And he was saying, "I'm by myself in the ocean. How am I violating the rule?" But they called Coast Guard boats to actually force him to come on shore because he was just in the ocean, and the deputies were like, "Come outside." He's like, "No, I'm not." So yeah.
When I saw that was something that struck fear in me. I thought that was so odd and weird and just. Yeah, it was strange.
If they want to mess with you, they will. I don't think there's any law stopping them, especially right now, because it's mostly. I mean, I think under a state of emergency, I think the police are under a lot less burden of proof. They can just say he just looks suspicious, or he was coughing and infecting the dolphins, or whatever BS excuse they can come up with. Most judges will be like, we'll cut them slack. I mean, they'll probably release you without any charges, but you may spend up to a week in the jail because there's not enough people to process you. So that's what they're banking on, making sure that, like, you know, between the prospects of being in jail and like listen and obeying what they say, most people will probably go with the latter.
It's so crazy. I heard about a tiger that recently got tested positive for COVID-19. Is that true? In
the Bronx Zoo, I think, yeah, the one tiger was basically positive. So he or she was coughing and sneezing, and it was like immediately this petition was started online for people to donate for the Tiger Fund, and I'm thinking, this is somebody's getting very rich out of very gullible people, and let's see what comes out of this. But don't be surprised if you now start seeing articles all over and popping up everywhere saying, like, I don't know, a pangolin or like a parrot or whatnot got this virus.
Well, do you see how it's being weaved into being good for the environment, and humans are like a cancer on this planet, and the plebes should just stay home so the planet can be okay? Again, so many different levels to this. It's really hard to navigate, you know. But yeah, it's insane.
There was a major thread on the forum. I don't know how often you frequent it these days. I mean, there was this guy, Deborah19, I think that's his alias, and that was his main thing. He was basically saying, look, why are you concerned about this quarantine? Yes, it is a collapse, and yes, most of these jobs are completely BS. Like they shouldn't even be there because they don't produce any value. So now all these jobs they'll be destroyed, and then people have time to work on meaningful things. And in the meantime, the environment will get cleaned up. Basically, like, we've been encroaching on the environment for centuries. So now maybe it's our time to stay at home and get locked up and give the environment a chance to recover. So that's actually, I don't know who's promoting this, but I've seen this on several online venues saying that this is a good thing for us, for everyone.
Yeah, but you and I don't pollute the environment to the extent that these industrialist Standard Oil types like ravage the earth.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And do you see that? I mean, that's.
Yeah. But I understand where that person is coming from. I think it's a little bit misguided.
Yeah.
Say it again.
No, I was going to say, do you see the big corporations, pollution, et cetera? Like, that's not going to discontinue, is it? I mean,
I guess the cars people are not driving as much, right? So most of the good effects that we're seeing is because of individuals scaling down their activity. Now, I mean, there are some businesses too, but the major businesses on which countries depend for just for the economy, for being around, right? They're not scaling it down. You can shut down the, power plant because like the entire city of LA will be without power. So these things are ongoing, and I don't think they're going to stop. So if anything, like the only people who are quarantining themselves are the little people like us, while the big ones that are really responsible for destroying the environment, that's shit. Now they have a free pass to do whatever they want because now there's nobody out there watching them. So they're completely on their own.
I heard an analogy, and I apologize, David, for making this a conspiracast.
No,
but like if pre-coronavirus was like being out in the yard, like being in a prison, being out in the yard, what we're phasing into is like solitary confinement, basically. So you just need everything to do anything. Could go to the supermarket, to travel, to do whatever you need, papers, and just draconian measures.
Well, on that note, if we were kind of locked up, but it was like we didn't really realize it before, and now we're realizing it, is this a tipping point eventually where people start to realize like how draconian it really is?
Well, I think it really depends on the person's job and what their financial situation is, and I think their state of mind too. I mean, if you're really into like believing what the government says and going along with the flow, and then even if your financial situation is not good, some people will continue to do what they're told. But I think the people who are most likely to go with the flow are the ones who are not that worried about losing their jobs. And are kind of basically taking a paid vacation right now. Those people, and I was surprised. I mean, I think that's a significant number of the population. Most of the people in DC, at least that I know and keep in touch with, are in that boat. So they are heavily for the quarantine because they're getting paid. Their companies are getting bailed out by the government for at least 8 weeks. Because the government is going to cover payroll and like in taxes and whatnot. So the companies can maintain these people without firing them. So in a sense, this is like a 2-month paid vacation, and these people are ecstatic, right? So, but there are other people who are less fortunate, the ones that are working in these small businesses that are mostly seasonal or in the service industry. They're not happy at all. I mean, they're stuck at home, but there's already agitation stirring up. And from what I'm hearing, these people are basically saying, look, if we don't get our IRS checks within the next 4 weeks, things will turn ugly because we need money for food and we don't have it. Right now, we're maxing out credit cards, but some of these banks are actually now starting to go under as well, especially the smaller ones. And many of these people who rely on these, who basically like paycheck to paycheck and work in the service industry, some of them are using these prepaid cards from like less known institutions, and those are going belly up. So now they don't have money. So you got to do something for food, and you can't wait 4 weeks for your check to get food. So we'll see what happens.
Well, I'm worried because if it gets worse and worse and worse and worse, and then people like Bill Gates, people start listening to him, and then it changes, but it changes in a way that is not, is arguably not better, obviously.
But here's the thing: how would you know that what is changing for the better or the worse? Everybody's at home, right? So their only outlet is the media. That's where they get the information from. The media is not going to start reporting, oh, there's a massive riot in New York City. 100,000 people are storming stores for food. I don't think you'll ever hear that on the news. You may hear it from external media sources, but then at that point is when I think we're going to start seeing the censorship instrument really kick in. Like Google will start delisting things, and I've already started seeing some of that. Twitter. So people will get into this basically echo chamber, and all we get to hear is what CNN tells us. So unless the building, just like in my building, unless my building starts a riot, there's no way for me to know how things really are outside.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Danny.
Well, I was going to say, if this goes for 18 months, think of what people will do to leave like the at-home hell. They'll do literally like anything, And I don't want to get your channel but they'll definitely take the V word like gladly, not virgin. You guys know what I'm talking about. They're rolling up they'll roll up their sleeves willingly at the end of 18 months of solitary confinement, of being home, not seeing their friends, not going to movies and stuff. So
the R word, or not the V word, the R word.
R word.
What's the word? Let's just put it out there.
Revolution.
Vaccine.
Oh, vaccine. I thought revolution.
Well, that would be ideal. I think it's this is totally theory. I hope none of this happens. I hope I'm totally wrong. I think it's like a big psychological operation to just push everybody through this funnel, and that's why Gates is going so hard on it. Like, it's just, you have to listen to what they say and what they want to do, and I think it says volumes when
he said he basically thinks that free movement of people around the world is over. He's like, he will never come back. We need to get adjusted to the new normal. We'll need papers to go anywhere, right? And I'm thinking, so hold on a second. Didn't you just tell us that if we get the vaccine, everything will be fine? So now you're telling us we will have to get the vaccine and we'll be restricted and not be able to go anywhere. I mean, if people listen to that and really like process this, why would anybody voluntarily accept that? And I think that's where maybe this is going.
It's so troubling. I was on Facebook, which I'm vowing to just kind of end my time there. But you guys are probably seeing this. One of the posts, one of my friends posted something that was a PubMed study. It was straight from a PubMed study. It was a quotation that was a study on vaccination, on flu shots administered to participants. And the participants who had been administered the flu shots actually had an increased risk of respiratory infection, including corona.
Yeah.
And Facebook flagged it by their quote independent fact checker. So it was the quote was blurry, and it said, "This post has been flagged. If you want to learn more, click the button." And when I clicked the button, it said, "This post has been flagged as false information by our independent fact checkers," and they used as their resource an article in USA Today.
So the PubMed study was falsified by an article in USA Today.
Yes.
Well, get ready. I mean, that's the new facts will be whatever Bill Gates says and thinks and feels about, and basically that's what Facebook is going to propagate.
Well, I think that's part of the evidence of who's doing this. The technocrats are probably involved in some way, shape, or form. And you're right. I think, again, if anything we say has any validity, the censorship will get more strict, and then military will probably be involved in some way, shape, or form.
So, guys, what is the best thing that can come of this in your eyes?
Pass this one to Georgi.
I think the collapse of the fake industries, just as that forum user said, that's probably a good thing. It is a good thing in and of itself, but it will depend. The overall outcome, whether it's good or bad, will depend on what happens to those people, right? I don't want people to die. I don't want innocent people to die, starve, riot, and get shot, or like get rounded up and get sent to like a concentration camp or something like that. So the collapse of the fake industries, I think, is a good thing. Now, if this is going to result in yet another, it's already resulting partially in yet another bailout for like massive evil industries like Goldman Sachs, well, actually banks, right? Not necessarily industries. I don't know, General Electric, the big three, the car companies in Detroit. So these are not companies that at this point are really providing much value. So if this is going to be another bailout on the back of the taxpayer, then I'm not sure that this is a good outcome. But then again, I don't think the government is really hoping that I don't think the government has any realistic hopes that this year will collect much in terms of tax revenue either. So it's not, so the taxpayer is bailing the industries, the failed industries again, but this time I don't think, unlike 2008, 2009, when there was a significant amount of employment of the population, this time there's a massive amount of unemployment. So these industries will be bailed out with fake money. Now, this may lead to, at some point, if this printing of the money continues, it may lead to certain countries out there refusing to honor, basically, maybe refusing to buy U.S. treasuries, or starting to call into question the validity of the dollar. Because if you have an unlimited printing press, at some point the people who are holding your debt are going to say, enough of this. Like, you're devaluing. Like, we funded you by buying your treasuries, and now you're printing more money to pay all of your obligations without creating any actual value. So this devalues our holdings of your debt. So at some point, depending on how much devaluation occurs, certain other big countries like China, Russia, Brazil, like the European Union, who've always wanted to dethrone the US dollar as the reserve currency, may get together and say, you know what, we're going to create like an alternative currency. And at that point, all bets are off. I mean, we'll see. But the good thing is, I think, is that people are one way or another are going to realize that how much of the economy and the world that they live in is fake. Now, the problem is, once you realize that truth, are you going to be able to act upon it? To quote Edward Snowden, who once said, is that basically they asked him, like, well, what is your end goal? He's saying, like, well, I want people to know the truth. And then the journalist, I think he was from The Guardian, said, well, what's the point? The people are powerless. He's like, yeah, but without knowing the truth, you can't even begin to think how to act. At least now I'm giving them the truth. So as more and more people are becoming aware of things that Snowden has been saying, they're being, we've exposed them, at least in the medical industry, right? As more and more people become aware of this, I think this is a good thing. The question is whether they'll be given a chance to change things, or whether the powers that be will clamp down and say, oh, now that you got us and know how fully fake we are, guess what? We're going to control you, and we're not going to let you we're not going to let you collapse this thing to the ground and rebuild it, because we want this to continue just as it did before. So it will either be, I guess we'll see like a true collapse and a rebuilding of the world, or we're going to see, just like as Ray mentioned, the world may descend into tyranny and disease before.
I'm thinking like the beginning of T2 Judgment Day, like the.
Yes, that's right.
That's kind of where my head's at right now.
Except there's no AI. There's no AI that unleashed itself upon the world.
So follow up, like if we're going to access good information, because it's possible, it's out there, but it's becoming harder and harder, I feel like, to sift through the nonsense. So where do we go? How do we do it? What do you guys do?
think we're doing it, like I think having real conversations for as long as you can is, like somebody asked me, they're like, Danny, why don't you try not to say those words that YouTube doesn't like? So like if the channel I operate is getting like shadow banned in some way, and I do suspect that it is, it won't get so harshly lowered in the rankings. But I just thought that it wasn't worth it. Like if it's doing all this effort to like skirt around something like Georgi and I have like put together. And so just, I don't know, is there anything else you can do? Organization is probably really good, but that is almost impossible now.
So to expand on what you said, like having a good conversation, I think it's crucial to sort of like resurrect the spirit of Blake College that Ray had in Mexico. So the main point of that college wasn't to teach you things. It was to provide information and then kind of like have people practice being human without attacking each other, without saying like, no, I'm the right one and everybody else is the wrong one, right? So just maintaining humanity for as long as possible and continuing to absorb information with as little bias as possible. I think that's really the formula for going forward. In terms of sifting through the information, I mean, there's so much, the signal to noise ratio at this point is so low. Chances are that unless you already suspect what the truth is, so you're searching for specific nuggets in the ocean, it's probably pointless trying to just now starting to apply a filter to what's coming in. You must already have some sort of a preformed idea of where things are going and then trying to get evidence for and against it and evaluate that. But if you're starting with a blank slate and getting inundated with all this information, chances are it'll be very difficult for you to form a proper opinion on your own. Now, if you're surrounded by good-minded people who are not there trying to harm you in any way, even if the information is not correct, usually things turn out for the better. I mean, basically, it's the humanity in the interaction of like-minded people who don't want to control each other's lives. That's what usually leads to truth. But as we said, the information is constantly flowing. There's mostly noise, but there's also some good information as well. And even if you just look at the medical information, that example with Facebook, as you said, most adults should be able to distinguish and look at this case and say, okay, so there's the PubMed study, and then there's the USA Today article. And if Facebook is telling me that the independent fact checkers took that article, maybe, but you should be reading the article as well, right? So let's say the article is an entirely opinionated political kind of piece, right? And if that's what's being used to falsify, quote unquote, a study published on PubMed, which has been peer reviewed. In other words, fact checkers have already done their job, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't get published. Now, they're not infallible, but there has been fact checking there too. And if that's what Facebook is doing, then this should be a good sign for an independently thinking adult. Then maybe Facebook is not the place to get like the proper information. Again, stay close to your family, stay close to your loved ones. Make sure you surround yourself with people who they question you, but they don't negate you in the spirit of William Blake. So opposition is great. That's what leads to progress. But if you're always getting shut down by people who are kind of like, whether they're a mob or a single person, if you're basically getting told to shut up because you don't know what you're talking about, then those are probably not people you want to be around during these trying times.
Yeah, to piggyback that, I remember when you guys were on with Ray, and a similar thing was asked to Ray, and he said that these small groups, these small communities that are based in humanity, that are just about letting people's true natures come out and working together and this real connected group. And if these small groups all over the place are all okay with each other and loosely connecting with each other, that's going to be real hard to break up. I think
the current situation is providing a little bit of an opportunity for that to happen, because now everybody's, well, not isolated, but everybody is home with other people, right? So the people now, for some of these people, this situation is going to be bad because they will be so pressed financially and health-wise that they're not going to be feeling like, sitting around and having a nice conversation. But for many others, this will provide the opportunity because maybe some of them have been wanting to do this for years, but they were so busy with work and other things that they didn't have the time for this. And now that they're being forced to stay at home, being surrounded by like-minded people, that will probably start to happen. Now, the question again is, Let's say you get together with a like-minded group. You agree on certain things, you disagree on others, but you develop a plan for action. The question is, will the powers that be allow you to put this in action?
And another good point about all this is some people theorize that this is happening because of things getting out of control. And so like Hong Kong getting out of control with the protesters and then the yellow vests. And then and more or less, however you feel about Trump, like his election was odd, you know? So who knows, maybe this was fast tracked or something and is not, it is modifiable. Like wasn't Obama going to send missiles to maybe, was it Syria or something? And then people put up a big stink about it and then it didn't happen. So things aren't set in stone. Doesn't make them easier to go through or whatever. But yeah, I guess if enough people get together and put up a stink, then who knows what could happen.
Yeah. So hopefully this time of reflection that's being imposed upon us will allow people to look at what's being served to them on the media and realize if this really is the world that they're living in, or whether their perception and their cautiousness is seeing other things, and now the mass media is saying, no, that's not what you're seeing. Here is the reality we want you to believe. I mean, some of my friends, as brainwashed as they're already starting to feel a little bit uneasy. And I think that's the first sign of things going in the right direction, because it means there's a discrepancy between what you're being told is happening and what's happening in your life. Now, depending on how uncomfortable this becomes, I think that will be the sort of like the catalyst that will either make them open their eyes fully or continue to go with the flow if the government provides remediation, right? If the government provides relief for this discrepancy that you experience right now. So I would say the stronger this discrepancy, barring putting you on the street and making you starve, the better for everybody is, because we've been living in a manufactured reality for at least 100 years.
Well, Georgi, you mentioned we can't just jump in, from nowhere, because we're going to get lost. We're going to drown in the fire hose of information. And Danny, you said we're kind of already doing it. We're doing some of the right things. So let's play a little game before we get started with the game. So we're coming from this bioenergetic point of view. Can you guys talk a little bit about that for listeners? We don't have to go, deeply into it, because a lot of people listening are probably going to have already heard Ray, or you, Georgi, or you, Danny. But what is this bioenergetic view? Why is it different? And why does it give us maybe a better chance to get in here?
The analogy that I like to give people is the analogy with the car. On the version of modern medicine and health that we've been told is the case for the last 100 years is, our body's like the car, right? Basically, you have the structure of the car and you have the fuel of the car. And the food that we consume is the analogy is like the gas that you put in your tank. Yes, different kinds of fuel may make you go faster or slower, but in general, what kind of fuel you use has no effect on the structure of the car. Your car will still be that same car, whether you choose to load like the crappiest fuel or like the very high quality, right? The structure of the car is independent, and it's kind of there a priori. In other words, you have a car before you have the gas, which I'm using as an analogy for energy, right? The bioenergetic view says you cannot separate the two. So there can be no structure without the energy, and the energy cannot really flow into useful things unless there is a structure. So the car, basically the kind of fuel you put in your car, according to the bioenergetic view, is basically crucial, is vital for the maintenance of the structure of the car. In other words, if you use the wrong kind of fuel, you're not only going to have a blown tire, but the car will start to disintegrate. And actually it can happen rather quickly. And the very process of aging and death should not be seen as the car over time getting this wear and tear just because it has existed for so long, but simply the bad fuel that you put in the car and the external influence are making the structure of the car disintegrate, and eventually the car falls apart, but it has nothing to do with the amount of time the car has been on the road. It's strictly a function of the quality of the environment and the fuel you put in the car. So what people you surround yourself with, the quality of your life, the quality of your environment, and the kind of food you eat are vitally important, are crucial for your health, for your longevity, and really for your ability to interact with the world and make a meaningful contribution.
Well said. Yeah, are like an elevator pitch for the energy structure? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess so. I Georgi, I think that was really well encapsulated. Danny, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I guess when I'm talking one-on-one with somebody, I'll try to say a symptom. So I'll be like, do you ever have cold hands and cold feet, or do you wake up in the middle of the night, or do you have to pee very often, or something like that? And then sometimes the person will be like, yes, I do have to do that. And I think that's like a starting point for explaining things. But I think Georgi explained it masterfully. One of the things that did help me a lot was that Albert St. Georgi quote. And it's like a cell needs energy for all of its functions, but also to maintain its structure. And I think that when I read that, I was like, oh, like that was like a piece of the puzzle that I wasn't really getting. And then cells form tissues, and tissues form organs, and organs form you. So it's like this ripple effect. And so that, I guess that would be that was how I introed into what Ray was saying, because I didn't understand anything he was talking about at first.
To use your example, to enhance the example of the car, so it's not just the quality of the fuel, but also how well the car burns it, right? So if you have like a good fuel, but your internal combustion engine is not processing it properly, right? Then basically the analogy of the car, the Bioenergetic view says the car will actually over time start to disintegrate. It will not simply be it will also be a result of the car not going as well or as fast as it normally does. The very structure of the car will start falling apart if you either have bad fuel or you're not processing the fuel properly. And by the way, the latter is the function of the former. The reason usually why you're not processing fuel properly is simply because you put the wrong kind of fuel, like laden with PUFA, or you're being bombarded with like endocrine disruptors from all over the place, or you're being under chronic stress. So I guess, let me think of an analogy of the car. Okay, well, I guess if the road that the car is running on is bumpy, and it's bumpy continuously, eventually I think even car owners will know that the car actually, even in the classic definition, the car will start to fall apart. Yeah. Simply the road is exerting stress on the car and the car is falling apart. Well, it's very, very much, probably even much more true in the case of the human organism, is that the environment is imposing some kind of a restriction on you or stress on you. You cannot really thrive. Ultimately, you're part of the environment is part of you, and whatever is the environment, it is also you. This whole dichotomy of the organism existing independently and somehow interacting with a foreign alien world, but then these being two separate entities, this needs to go away. Nothing can be further from the truth. You're one with your environment, and any problem in the environment ultimately manifests as a problem in you.
And it goes full circle in every direction too, right? Because if our energy stores are replete, if they're full, then the stresses that the environment is imposing aren't going to seem as stressful.
Precisely. Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I guess if you have more energy, then you can swerve the car and avoid some of these bumps on the road and the holes in the road. But again, it really depends. It's a function of how well can you respond to the challenges, in this case, the bumpy road. And that depends on, even in the classic analogy, what kind of fuel you have and how well you're producing energy from it, right? That's really the end goal. So if you're not having enough fuel, eventually you can't steer the car. I mean, you can try, but it won't move. So you'll just go straight in a pre-specified direction, and then it will get into a hole, or over the curb and then break down. But if you have energy, you can avoid these things for a while. But I think ultimately the message is, if there is a serious problem with the road, you need to be evaluating if you should even be on that road. There are many other roads, and you should maybe trying some other road if that particular one you're on is really bumpy, because even with the proper production of energy, eventually the stress of the environment tends to overwhelm everything else.
Awesome. All right, well, let's play this game. I think more of this will come out as we're playing this game. I can't believe we're doing this. I think it's great. We're going to be playing Would You Rather with Danny and Georgi. Short disclaimer, I'm just going to read some questions from a list that I drafted. My wife helped me a little bit, and our boy threw some out there. I don't know if his are going to get asked or not, but maybe. So small disclaimer, you guys, these questions, some of them are more serious or less serious than others. And it's a game. So let's have some fun with it.
As long as I beat Georgi, I'm good.
I don't have at it, man.
I have no idea how I would assess. Maybe we'll ask. at the end to
totally joke.
I've never played this game for a score. I thought it was simply meant to get the weirdest and funniest response from people by asking them, would you rather between two choices, neither one of which is preferable.
So we're going to ask some that are where neither one is preferable. And then we're going to ask some where they're both optimal. And it forces you guys to make a choice between the two. You'll see what this is like. First question, would you rather run a marathon every 2 weeks or be forced to sleep with your mouth wide open for the rest of your life?
So, oh wow.
Whoever wants to go first, I guess.
I used to have legit sleep apnea, and I would wake up and I would look dead. And then you chase your tail the rest of the day trying to just feel a little bit better. So I don't know, will breathing through your mouth necessarily, like all things being equal, create a really strong, obviously a stress response, but would it be as bad as sleep apnea? I don't know. I don't know, Georgi. What would you pick?
I would take the marathon, and I'm going to raise an analogy that like a continuous exposure to low amounts of estrogen is actually less harmful than a few intermittent surges of estrogen, because that's actually its function really physiologically. If you have a wound that needs to heal, you may have like a surge of estrogen for a few days, but then it should abate, right? But if you have like a chronic mild elevation of estrogen and it continues unabated, it really disrupts the organism systemically and prevents it from recovering and going about its business, for lack of a better word. So if it's a marathon every 2 weeks, I think every 2 weeks may be pushing it. I mean, that may start creating other problems strictly structurally. You're going to start falling apart simply from joint damage. But in terms of metabolic damage, I would probably take the marathon every 2 weeks than sleeping with is it only sleeping, or is it like throughout the day with your mouth open?
Well, I guess it depends on your profession and all that. But no, I was thinking you just 8 or 9 hours a night or whatever, or 10 or 7.
You had no idea we would pick the questions apart.
In that case, I would probably go with the sleeping with the mouth open. But if it's keeping your mouth open and doing mouth breathing, which I do know people who do that, and that's how they live their lives really. And then this being a normal way of breathing versus running a marathon every 2 weeks, I'll go with a marathon. But if it's only, right, it's still damaging, only during sleep, and then you wake up and you regain control over yourself and you close your mouth and you start breathing through the nose, then I'll probably go with the sleeping with the mouth open.
Yeah, I guess if I was relatively healthy, I'd prefer the sleeping with the mouth open versus, and do I have to run at a certain pace for the marathon? Because that would be another thing.
I think it will force you to eventually start walking. It's really, I don't know many people who actually run the whole marathon, unless you're a competitive runner and that's what you do. Most people run for about 10 miles if they're in good shape, and then they walk the rest, right? Or strut, or in a very slow pace of running, which they look like they're running, but in reality they're walking, because you cannot outwalk them if you walk right next to them. I think as far as pace, the marathon will force you, just the distance will force you to slow down, unless you're one of those Kenyan runners that does this like in their spare time. Like they just run to the grocery store, but they took a roundabout way and they ran like 26 miles just to buy bread.
Yeah, they're just a perpetual motion machine. I hear people say like, oh yeah, I sprinted for 2 minutes straight. And I'm like, well, like physiologically speaking, like, no, you didn't. Like you can't sustain what a sprint is for longer than about 7 seconds. Like our body systems don't work like that. So what I was thinking, Danny, was that you're running the marathon as hard as you can. But obviously it's not, like Georgi said, you're not, running at your maximum. It's just,
I mean, if you're sprinting, like if you're really overexerting yourself, very quickly you're going to start getting into lactic acidosis, and that will actually put an end to you can actually collapse before even heart bursts, which will be the final stage. If you continue exerting yourself, you'll get into cardiac arrest and a heart attack. But even before that, if you really overexert yourself, you will start feeling this burning pain throughout your entire body, and you start gasping for air, and that will force you to stop. It's almost like you're hitting a wall. So sprinting for more than, let's say, 10, 11 seconds, you've seen those 100-meter sprinters in the Olympics. There's a reason why they don't run more than that. And if you look at the difference between the 100-meter sprint and a 200-meter sprint, the people running the 200 meters, they run it only about 70% of the intensity of the 100 meters because this cannot be maintained for 200 meters, right? It just, even those competitive athletes will collapse.
And I like even just looking at the aesthetics, the way these athletes look, like a sprinter versus a marathoner. I've always thought that a sprinter is more pleasing to look at. And I don't know, that to me, that kind of says something too.
They also use a lot of steroids, unlike the marathon runners, but yeah. Like the explosive thing is mostly driven by, like, basically it's before lactic acid starts to build up. It's aerobic concentric exercise, really. So it's almost like lifting weights, but you're stopping at the point where you're starting to feel that burn, right? So you're only exercising on glycogen and on aerobically. Mm-hmm. Once the oxygen deficit starts to build up, you stop, and that's pretty much the sprint. While the marathon guys, they're adapted to burning fat, and actually a truly competitive marathon runner, if you ask them to sprint, they cannot. Their bodies have basically, the muscle fibers have changed, and they've almost completely gotten rid of the white muscle fibers that are the explosive ones, and they're almost fully, their muscles are almost fully composed of the red muscle fibers that are basically the anaerobic, the fat-dependent muscle fibers. And if you ask this marathon runner to sprint, he or she will run at this constant speed, no matter, regardless of whether it's a 100-meter run or like the 26-mile one. You cannot force him to accelerate.
Well, I love this, you guys, because I ask a question, and this is exactly what I wanted it to do. It's going to stimulate some conversation, and here we are. So let's go on to the next question. Would you rather be covered in fur or covered in scales?
I'll have to go with the fur.
Yeah, I'd also go with the fur.
All right.
But
any reason for that?
What is the underlying context of the question? Like, why would the covering matter? Like what's the point of this question?
Remember when I said some of these are going to be more or less serious than others? This might be one of the less.
What is the metaphysical essence of this question?
Exactly. Is it metabolically motivated, or is it, because if it's strictly aesthetics, then it comes down to preference. But if it's health-wise, then we need to know what the underpinning context is.
I think we got to look at this from a health perspective. And I would go with fur too, because, right, I feel like I could stay warmer. But that's just...
Well, remember when Ray talked about how, I haven't found these papers, I'd love to look at them, but like if the feet get too cold during the middle of the night, they'll start releasing cytokines. And I think the same thing happens to the head and any cold body part. So that was pretty
If your
interesting.
extremities are cold, you start basically most of the white blood cells is produced in the bone marrow of the extremities. So you can get basically like an immune suppressed state if your extremities are cold. If they're cold chronically, you'll have very low white blood cell count. And it's not a coincidence. They call it, in the States, they call it like old wives' tales that basically, when it's cold outside, you should really be warming up and like putting some extra layers of clothing because you can catch a cold. And doctors here are laughing. They're like, this is ridiculous. Unless there's a virus, you have nothing to fear about and whatnot. But I challenge you to go out during the winter and walk barefoot on the snow for, let's say, 5 minutes and then come back. And you'll see, you very often, you'll get like a respiratory infection and the doctor will be like, well, you caught a virus. No, sometimes these viruses can be produced internally. And actually, it's simply just from the fact of releasing these cytokines, they go through your lungs and they irritate them. And you start getting into a mild version of the SARS, which we're now seeing with COVID, without actually having any virus. You can give yourself a respiratory looking like condition just by exposing your extremities to cold conditions for too long. No virus needed.
I think Ray talked about these latent viruses in one of his audio interviews. I think it was on One Radio Network.
The microvesicles, right?
I think so.
You may have meant the retroviruses, but also like you can have a real, the microvesicles is what you produce when you're under stress. And then you also have the true retroviruses that are part of your DNA, and they get shedded and dumped into the bloodstream also as a result of stress. Estrogen reactivates them, cortisol does too. So you can actually test HIV positive if you're under extreme forms of stress. About 0.5% of the population can test positive for HIV, and I think up to 20 to 30% of the population can test positive for hepatitis. I think hepatitis C is the most common one if they're under extreme forms of stress. And then if they're not, basically, like, you know, if you let them recover, I don't know about the HIV, but I've seen studies that show that people who have tested positive for hepatitis, about 2 weeks later, when they got retested, there was no trace of the virus in their blood. And the doctors, of course, instead of saying, oh my God, maybe it's the stress that did it, they said, you know what? Our original test that confirmed hepatitis was wrong. Like they didn't have hepatitis because it's impossible for a hepatitis virus to go away on its own.
Really says something about our environment, how important that is. All right, guys, would you rather have backyard chickens or a huge grassy pasture full of Jersey cows?
Jersey cows for sure, right?
What are the chickens eating? I mean, I would have to go, because you can actually create some really good quality eggs if you feed the chickens beef tallow and beef liver every once in a while, and you let them wander around freely, because chickens are actually omnivorous. And despite the fact that we're being told that they need to eat grains, right? That's actually not what the wild chickens eat in the wild. I think hens are like descended from this wild bird that is still living in Malaysia. And if you look at what it eats in the wild, it actually mostly prefers things like insects and worms and whatnot. So it's actually eating mostly a diet that's heavily skewed towards the saturated fat portion of the fatty acids. And if you can mimic that with the chickens, I think they're going to be producing some really high quality eggs. Now, would I prefer to be surviving solely on eggs versus solely on milk? I will go with the latter. But in terms of like preference for food and the quality of food, I think you can get some pretty good quality eggs with the chickens, with the caveat that this should not be your only source of protein. It should not be your only diet.
Awesome. Danny? You said Jersey.
Yeah, I'd go with the cows. I think I've become like a milk snob over the last few years. And so, yeah, I like drinking milk, and yeah, everything Georgie said makes sense. I just don't eat that many eggs.
If I could do both, I think milk and egg would be like the perfect protein.
I can do both.
You don't need to do pretty much anything else except potentially eat a little bit of iron. But the older you get, the less iron you need. So if you're 40 or over like me, you can, like, your meal, your food could be mostly milk and eggs, and you should be perfectly fine.
I love this because it's forcing us to make decisions that are totally like, these are things we want to do both of, you know, maybe. I don't know if you guys could tell when I was tilting my screen to show the
for sure.
the backyard. So we got our chickens are free range and free.
Where are they? Can I see them again?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a white one. See that?
Oh yeah, I saw.
Just in the corner here.
Yes.
Of the window. But that's Boots. She's running around doing something.
So do you feed them anything, like, or you let them basically find their own food?
We give them a little bit of like pellets that we get from the feed store in town,
right?
But we keep it out most of the time, and we let them just free roam. So most of what they eat is like they get worms, they get leaves off the trees, and they're kind of, you know, insects, spiders, you know.
Try giving them chopped raw liver. It's amazing. They love it. I mean, basically the eggs that they lay, you'll see you immediately see a difference. The yolk is this dark orange saturated color, like if they've had some decent amount of protein to eat. And that's really like and you can feed them like once a week, just like the humans. So even once every 2 weeks, give them a little bit of chopped liver. They will love it. And then they can actually keep them satiated for like a number of days. So you don't even have to give the pellets. I'm doing this a little bit of an experiment in Bulgaria right now with people who have chickens, and they're saying that unfortunately the beef liver and because of the culture over there, pork liver is much more readily available. So they're feeding pork liver, but it's still working rather well. I mean, they're basically letting the chickens roam completely free, no pellets, no grains, but once a week they give them a pound of chopped liver for every 10 chickens, and this seems to be more than enough. The eggs have become bigger too. Like basically they've gone from a double A size to an extra large.
I can't wait to try that out. I'll get on that this week. About a year ago, some of our chickens were losing feathers in weird places, and they had like a pecking order thing going. And it turned out that we didn't have enough space for them. And so we've since just, basically, 100-fold increased their space. But at the time I was experimenting with like aspirin crushed up in their food, and pregnenolone even. Like I was pulling out a lot of little tricks, and I swear I thought they were doing better, and I think they were. But I think at the root of it, they were just too packed in close together. So I think they seem so happy and so healthy being just out and having tons of space. I'm gonna try the liver.
Same thing with humans. So you imagine what happens with the shutdown now. We're starting to see people losing feathers, or scales, or whatever, like it was the preference on the previous question. But yeah, pregnenolone is great. You can actually mix it with the liver and give it to them, and I don't think you can overdo it. I mean, they will gobble it up very happily. There are actually some older studies with pregnenolone increasing the egg yields of chickens. So that will probably be a very welcome change. So yeah, I mean, pregnenolone in the liver for the win. Let us know how it works. I think it sounds really good.
I'll provide an update. Okay, next question. Would you rather give in to a mandated vaccine you don't agree with, or go to jail for a year?
Oh,
that's a tough one.
Well, somebody I was watching was like, right now, decide what you will and won't do. And yeah, you'd like to say I would absolutely, positively not get a vaccine. But being in jail would be so terrible.
I will have to go with a vaccine because you can mitigate the effects of the vaccine, but you don't have much control in jail.
That's true. Something worse could happen to you in jail.
You can die, if this is your first time, they've shown that people that come out of jail, about 40% of them have a post-traumatic stress disorder. So this means you will have ruined your systemic health, because PTSD really is sort of like an overdrive of the stress system that is set in, and it's really hard to like shut it down, basically to recover back to normal. Now this is aside from physically bad things that can happen to you, such as getting stabbed and killed by other various different ways. So I think it depends on the jail. If you mean county jail, where basically you're in your own cell, and it's mostly like a medium security prison, where some people even they allow like conjugal visits, right?
We're talking an Epstein sweetheart deal.
That's right. Right. So if it's a true prison where you're basically surrounded by hardened inmates and there's a real chance of getting killed, I think most sane people will choose the vaccine, because you can do things to mitigate it. I mean, think of the vaccine as a stressful event, which we have many of these in life, and you can do certain things to mitigate it, like making sure progesterone is probably one of the best things you can do, because the bad side effects of the vaccine are driven by the adjuvants. And basically, like, I don't think they use mercury anymore, but they now use like a type of endotoxin to trigger the immune response. And now we have studies I posted on the blog in the forum showing that the pregnanes, possibly pregnenolone is one, but the study was directly with progesterone, showing that because of the structure, it can bind to this endotoxin and act and deactivate it directly. So you may be actually lucky, and if you're allowed to take some progesterone or some other anti-endotoxin thing before the vaccine, you may not even get any effects of the vaccine, good or bad. It may just be like this one-time thing that gets injected into you and it gets processed and excreted. If you can manage to handle that, the immune priming response, which is what allows the vaccine to take hold. Now, there may be a lot of other things that we don't know about the vaccines that are in too small quantities to be detected, but still matter. I mean, there are things that can exert an effect in microgram amounts, and basically based on the current testing sensitivity of the equipment, you can have a number of poisons there that are being put for deliberate reasons, but that they will not show up on the standard tests. So it really depends. If it's a standard vaccine, assuming nothing else is there except the adjuvant and the actual active ingredient, I will go with a vaccine. If it's something more nefarious, such as the rumors and the conspiracy theories that basically the vaccines have these chronically immunosuppressive chemicals that eventually give you cancer, then I would say it's a tougher call. You may be, depending on the quality of life in the jail, you may be better off in jail. It really depends.
Yeah. Got it. Well, yeah, I was going to ask you about ways to mitigate if we had to. Hopefully we don't come to that state of affairs. But
yeah, mitigating things for jail, I would say if you can choose one, I would probably ask for basically for the ability to supplement with
dihydrotestosterone. Vaccines, right?
No,
yeah, no, I was going to say, I was going to ask for ways to mitigate, but you already covered it. So
well, ways to mitigate jail. I think there is a way.
Yeah.
So there have been studies showing that, first of all, I guess most of the listeners know that androgens act as pheromones as well.
Okay.
Now, some of them basically, like, you don't want to be attracting a gay person in jail, right? So you don't want to be, but it's been shown that it's testosterone that's attracting the females and the homosexual males. But if you're high on dihydrotestosterone, it actually has a very not scary, but like a subduing effect on a very primal level, and everybody will avoid you, both the homosexuals and the females and the guards, and potentially the homicidal maniacs in jail as well. So the higher you are on DHT, the more you project this aura of calmness and respect, and the less likely you will be to get in trouble. But if you're pumped full of testosterone, the moment this thing starts to aromatize, it will trigger aggressive responses from both males and females. Now, that's why having too high of a testosterone is not a good thing. And many of the bodybuilders have discovered this firsthand. They either get yelled at or even attacked by their spouses, or they get in fights unprovoked, right? Sometimes they're looking for this kind of thing, but it's really the testosterone, it's aromatization that's driving both your aggression and the aggressive response from other people. DHT does not have this effect. In fact, if you get it to a significantly high level, you'll simply be left alone.
Got it. All right, this is great, you guys. Would you rather have an optimal environment, uterine and otherwise, for the first 1,000 days from conception of your life, and then a very less than ideal environment for the rest of your life, or have a toxic environment the first 2 years of life, and then a rich, life-supportive environment the rest of your life?
I go with the first one, I think.
I will go with so to me, in terms of if all other things are being equal, you'll get about the same effect overall throughout life. However, I will probably go with the latter one because things since the time spent outside of the uterus is preferably, hopefully, longer, right? If you don't die in childhood from some kind of a disease, this extra time that you're on the outside allows for knowledge to develop and for discoveries to happen that may allow you to actually negate or even reverse some of these bad toxic things that happen in the first 1,000 days, right? So with that caveat, I will go with the latter one. But if all the things are being equal, assuming no new knowledge is discovered, everything else stays the same, then I would say it's a toss for me. I don't think there will be any significant difference in terms of lifetime statistically averaged effects over a large number of the population. You'll see about the same overall effect.
And Danny, were you saying the first 1,000 days because of what, how integral that is to the developing organism and the rest of the?
Well, yeah, not even a highbrow argument. I just feel like I know people that like get away with murder, and I know for a fact that they did have a really good family or a really supportive home. But of course that doesn't necessarily reflect on the 1,000 days, but if I were to guess which one was more impactful, Georgie's probably done way more research on this than I have, but that seems more, I don't know, more appealing.
Yeah. It's now the first 1,000 days is definitely like a imprint in the organism for life. There's no question there. My only reason for saying that I would probably choose the latter is just like I said, is the time factor. Because if you spend all this time outside of the uterus, let's say 60 to 70 years or even more, throughout that time, consuming knowledge, because the world is constantly changing and new knowledge comes about, you may be able to negate/reverse some of these toxic effects that are happening in the uterus. I don't think we're at that level yet, right? But again, I've also seen people who had a really good experience their parents were well off, they were happy, and then basically they had a really shitty life afterwards. Those people collapse too. It's not a given that if the first 1,000 days were fine, you'll be okay.
But wasn't the second half like a kind of mediocre life? It wasn't necessarily bad, right? So that was the other thing that stood out to me.
Exactly.
Yeah, Danny. You took the words. I mean, pretty literally, which is great. I said a very less than ideal environment, but I didn't say completely shitty or toxic.
Yeah. No, that's how I interpret it.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we'd never have to make this decision between.
Well, because the reason I took it the second one is because you said the toxic thing during the first 1,000 days, right? So I expected something equivalent for the rest of it to like give it a balance. If it's going to be like a mediocre environment, nothing's really going on, right? No excitement, you're just sitting there, drinking, eating, staying at home, quarantined, then I would go with the first option because it is imprinting of a life. But if it's a choice between, your mom was treated with like absolute respect and got everything she would need it, extra progesterone, etc., and then the moment you enter this world, you're basically in a world of hell, then it is, for me, it is a toss. And in fact, you may not live long enough to be able to, enjoy these first 1,000 days because life will be so tremendously stressful. So it really depends on, the weighting of the different periods.
Awesome. All right. Next question. Would you rather ingest psilocybin every few months or microdose LSD twice a week?
They're about the same. I don't think there's any difference.
What do you mean by that?
I've never.
I think we're frozen here.
So I do the LSD. But
hold on here. I think we're frozen, Danny.
Hello?
Okay, you guys.
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, here we go. Sorry, let's
back.
start from the beginning there.
I was saying, well, first of all, why is there a difference in the frequency? Why is it psilocybin every few months and LSD like what is it, every 2 weeks? So
do you want to ask your question again? Did it screw up the recording?
Yeah, let me try again. Yeah, the discrepancy or the difference between the timing of it, Georgi, was just kind of random. I mean, these questions, and it looks like I'm gonna have to plug my computer in. Actually, we don't die out.
Take your time.
I might just jump on that real quick.
Take your time.
But yeah, they're like you said, Georgi. Maybe they both have weight as far as value. But let me plug this computer back in.
I'm taking LSD right now, JK.
Exactly. Like, no need to ask me. You're too late. I'm hallucinating right now.
Well, you guys, like, isn't like if I made a drink with carbonated water and quinine and threw some maple syrup in there and had an aspirin and a B1, and maybe some pregnenolone, like, aren't I getting into kind of a low dose, serotonergic inhibiting, effect?
You are, but LSD is a hallucinogen, as is the DMT and the psilocybin. And in order for the hallucinogenic effects to happen, you need to actually activate one of the serotonin receptors. LSD is not a complete serotonin antagonist, and in fact, they can stop a trip on LSD or psilocybin by giving cyproheptadine, which is a full serotonin antagonist. So you're getting into the anti-serotonin thing, but it's not LSD-like. I mean, the LSD has a mental effect that goes beyond simply blocking serotonin. The full mechanism of action of LSD, nobody knows how it really works, because they thought it's by activating this one serotonin receptor, but then they've shown that they bred mice that are lacking that receptor, and the mice still acted like they were on a trip. So there is a lot to LSD that we don't know, and possibly psilocybin as well. but simply for the fact that LSD is so much more anti-serotonergic than the psilocybin, I would probably go with the LSD. So the psilocybin is mostly like for a mental experience, for a religious experience. If you want to get reconnected and feel one with the world, I think LSD has a much more fundamental, basic, healthful effect on metabolism. And if you have like any fibrosis or any kind of like a real structural damage inside of you, I think LSD will be very, very helpful for that as well. While the psilocybin is mostly taking care of the mental effects, but not much more than that.
Yeah, LSD is in a league of its own, if you want to consider it a supplement, I think.
That's right, yeah. So I would say LSD is kind of like psilocybin plus all the pro-metabolic effects of blocking serotonin. So they're really not on the same level.
Okay. Next question.
David had to tend to his chickens.
That's right.
Got some issues here that we just got worked out while you guys talk, which is great.
Connection issues? Like what was going on?
Oh, I just needed to find an outlet for the power source.
Yeah.
So we got it. I mean, we're rather seamless, I guess, if someone's just listening to this. Would you rather live at high altitude in a warm climate surrounded by 5G, or live in an underground city at sea level with no natural light, but where all the lights were red spectrum?
I would take the latter for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, most of the benefits of light is from the red spectrum. So basically, well, the only thing is like without UV light, you may not be producing much dopamine, but this can be handled through the diet. So if you're ingesting enough protein, so we have to address the diet as well, right? If you're eating sufficient amount of protein, then living in the dark, provided you have red light, should be okay. But if you're not eating a sufficient amount of protein, and you're living in the dark, then red lights are not going to be sufficient. You need your dopamine, otherwise you'll be dozing all the time. You'll be hibernating basically, because the lack of light basically triggers the hibernation, and it's the dopamine that keeps you awake. So you need to have a way of taking care of that aspect.
So what's the deal with 5G? Why would that be so bad?
Well, on so many different levels. Have you seen that discussion on Reddit? There is this guy from McMaster University in Canada who is like the world's premier expert, and I'm really always suspicious of experts, but I read his research, and he's very knowledgeable and coming across as very non-confrontational, very non-authoritarian, and to me that's a signal this is a person who's on the right track, right? I don't want to say who knows what he's doing, because nobody knows what they're doing. We're figuring it out as we go along. Yeah. But and I also emailed him, and he had this Ask Me Anything AMA gig on Reddit, and people just destroyed him. Basically, like they didn't even give him a chance. They kept saying like the same thing. Oh, this is a non-ionizing radiation. How can you be so stupid and scare people into telling them that that this is bad for them? There's no mechanism of action through which non-ionizing radiation would work. And he kept saying like, just give me a chance to respond. Like, what's up with these downvotes and brigades, like just tearing me apart. So anyways, he gave, and he linked to his research. So any non-ionizing radiation at a frequency higher than 100 megahertz has an extremely strong suppressive effect on metabolism, on oxidative phosphorylation. And in his opinion, because it also opens the calcium channels, it activates the serotonergic system. So he gave a number of different explanations, and people kept saying all of these are non-genomic, it's not going to cause cancer. And he kept saying, well, now we're actually starting to see evidence that metabolism is involved in cancer, and it may be causative, right? So that was before another study came out already, which showed that the Warburg effect is not just an effect, but also a cause of cancer. And this guy's research showed that 5G or like anything over 100 megahertz drastically increases the amount of lactic acid in the body, which is expected if it's suppressing metabolism, right? You're going to have an excessive glycolysis. So like across the board, heavily, anything that suppresses metabolism in my book is probably worse than even ionizing radiation. And the higher the frequency, the more potent the effects that we're seeing. Now, at the time the guy did his research, there was no 5G. That was maybe circa 2015, I think. But he tested up to 4G, and basically he noticed like an exponentially increasing effect with increasing frequency. So 5G, being a way like an order of magnitude higher frequency than 4G, is probably going to have all of these effects, but at a much more, they'll be much more intensive, and you probably you won't need as long of an exposure as the rats would need with 4G. So you all need like a few minutes of exposure to get like a profound metabolic suppression, versus like the 4G would need a couple of hours. But that was still enough because most people carry a phone, right? So you are getting a couple of hours of exposure. So I don't know if there's anything good about 5G. I mean, it's also the higher frequency, as you know, it's getting close to the ionizing radiation spectrum, right? And even though Einstein said that basically it's really only the frequency that matters in terms of whether this wave is going to be able to knock out an electron. In other words, whether it's going to be ionizing radiation or not. There's been some studies showing that the exposure can sometimes the exposure length can sometimes compensate for the lower frequency of non-ionizing radiation, and it can have non-ionizing radiation at a sufficient high frequency can have a carcinogenic effect just as strong as the ionizing one without actually being mutagenic. It's simply a question of frequency times length of exposure. So a slightly lower frequency, as in 5G, but a very long duration of exposure would give you about the same carcinogenic effects as X-rays taken, that are occurring for only a matter of seconds, right? Because that's how long you get exposed to. CT scan is even longer, but let's say X-ray. So it's really, you have to look at frequency and exposure in order to get the effects. And if the carcinogenic effects are the same, then what do you care if it's ionizing radiation or not? I mean, you can get cancer without the DNA mutations. They come later, right? You can also get the cancer with the DNA mutations, which is how X-ray is working, right? But as that study on Reddit showed, it's the metabolic dysfunction that precedes the appearance of cancer. So if the non-ionizing radiation can give you that, in consequence, it can give you cancer. So they're both carcinogenic. It's just different mechanisms of action. It really doesn't matter. It's still getting cancer. So yeah, 5G, 4G, it really does not matter. I mean, yes, lower frequency is less dangerous, but once you go over 100 megahertz, you're already in the danger zone.
Yeah, I feel like there are people that have measured the radio frequency and people that have not measured. I feel like I was totally changed after taking like a $300 meter, Acousticom 2, and walking around my neighborhood in Mexico, and then walking around like an open field, a completely rural field, and then taking it down to the center where everybody hangs out. I was like horrified how high the levels were. So, and also it makes a horrible sound on the meter. And so you actually, it's not like this ethereal concept of like EMF around you. It actually puts a sound to it, and it's a really off-putting sound. And so I started to take it more seriously.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this whole idea of things being non-dangerous because they don't structurally change you, this needs to go away. It goes back to the beginning of the show, the metabolic theory, right? It's the flow of energy that matters. And if the 5G or 4G, and if electromagnetic fields can impede that flow of energy, you are getting the structural effects down the road, even if it's not ionizing radiation, which changes the structure directly. So this whole idea of structure and function, we need to look at them separately. They don't really affect each other. This needs to go away. And the sooner people start thinking about structural, about functional experiences affecting their very bodies, the sooner we'll get to better health. Now there'll be a period of complete freak out, right? They'll be like, oh my God, everything can destroy me. Yeah, I mean that's kind of the point, to be aware of what's around you. And I think that's one of the greatest tricks the devil ever pulled, is convince people that it didn't exist, as in that movie. So this is the same thing here. The greatest trick the medicine ever pulled is convince people that things that don't break you physically are harmless for you, and they're not.
Do you guys think there's a correlation with all the 5G being rolled out and everything else that's going on? Or do you think it's more like just more gasoline, on the fire?
It definitely has an immunosuppressive effect. I wouldn't go as far as saying that the 5G towers are spreading the virus, just as some of these news outlets said. But yeah, if you're living right next to a 5G tower, you would have probably already noticed an immunosuppressive effect. You have more, like basically like the flu season, you'll probably be sick throughout it, right? Like every few weeks or so, you'll be getting a flu. But in reality, it would be simply an immunosuppressive effect and a pro-inflammatory effect, which sometimes doesn't even require viruses. So that part is definitely there. Now I keep checking the 5G map in DC, and thankfully it's not widely deployed at all, right? But I keep checking it, and to be honest with you, though, if we start getting these antennas installed inside of the building, I will probably start thinking about moving out and going somewhere else, because that's one of the few things that's. I mean, think about it. It's like the bumpy road for the car. This is the equivalent of having a bumpy road no matter where you go, right? So you can't even avoid the road. You can't change the road unless you move to a completely different area. That will be the definition of 5G. 24/7, you're getting blasted with this environmental effect that suppresses your immune system, suppresses oxidative phosphorylation, activates all kinds of inflammatory processes, increases serotonin synthesis, depresses dopamine, and these effects have already been seen for things as benign as the Wi-Fi router radiation, right? Or 4G, like in your cell phone, even like less dangerous things like if you're carrying like a portable radio, like a two-way radio, they're usually in the megahertz band, but those already are bad enough, and like they're having effects on the brain and your systemic health. So yeah, that's one of the very worst things to enjoy a worldwide deployment. To me, this is on par with basically pushing these anti-acid drugs and all kinds of drugs like statins to take, or antidepressants. Any of these things that you're supposed to take for life, that's now known they're really dangerous. To me, they're right on. I mean, 5G is right up there with them in terms of danger.
Some people were speculating that they need that increased bandwidth for the surveillance and all the huge amount of data that's going to be part of this technocratic resource-based economy. And so that was, I mean, at this point, nothing would surprise me. I haven't really looked into it too much, but that when I heard that, I was like, oh, that makes sense, that it's necessary for the new infrastructure of what they want to move to.
Yeah, I think that's true, but what nobody is talking about, actually some people are writing about, I can share some articles, this so-called knowledge economy, more data doesn't mean more knowledge. Yes, there will be a lot more data, everybody will be generating data, but that's actually what's called surveillance capitalism. In other words, we are the resource. Now companies are generating profit for themselves by analyzing us. We're the last frontier, because all the other natural resources have more or less already been cornered and kind of like distributed to different companies. Let me turn on the lights.
Sorry about that. That was definitely me.
Yeah, so if all the resources in the world have already been distributed, then the only resource that remains are the people themselves, right? So it was like when it was first sold to the world, it sounded like a very neat idea. We're going to analyze people's behavior, and out of the behavior of billions of people, we're somehow going to be able to extract new knowledge that will push science forward. Unfortunately, that's not how things work. Just because, I mean, yes, sometimes quantitative change does enact qualitative one as well, but apparently not when it comes to data. So a billion dummies running around and generating all of these data points, it's not going to allow you to basically it's not going to trigger an energy revolution like in the energy industry, or it's not going to trigger a revolution in the transportation industry. We're still limited by fundamental science such as physics, chemistry, biology, etc. And none of these discoveries so far have generated anything fundamentally new in any of these fields. It's all about, the only thing that this extra data can do is allow for optimization. But optimization is working within the same boundaries more and more efficiently, right? But it doesn't push the boundaries. So that's really what I would like to see discussed more in the news media. Of course, it will never happen, is the fact that more data does not, very rarely results in the generation of new knowledge. And it will certainly not, the artificial intelligence will not generate new knowledge. All it will do is create these mashups of old knowledge, and it will look like new, but it won't put a man on Mars, and definitely not beyond the solar system.
just to be clear, I think the social credit score system like China has, and so I think that some people talk about like the dialectic tension between America and China, but people have pointed out that Brzezinski like went to China, and that was like kind of a test tube for what they want to put over here, and so there's not much. They're just like a beta of what they've been wanting to install in America for a long time.
I think China and America are virtually the same model. It's just basically like in China is a lot more autocratic, but America is very fast on its way of matching what's already happening in China. But in terms of the developments, in terms of economic models, and basically what both countries are going towards, it's the same thing. It's surveillance capitalism combined with an increasingly autocratic and fascist regimes, because that's the only way to impose this on people, because people inherently feel, many of them, that our lives are not getting better, right? I mean, talk any random person on the street right now. I've talked to several of them in DC, they will all tell you like they don't feel like their lives are getting better. They've lived through now 3 recessions in a matter of 20 years, and each one of them much more severe than the previous one. And relatives are dying at a relatively young age. None of this has ever happened before for as long as they can remember. We're getting like our freedom of movement is being impeded, is being clamped down on. Where basically our lives feel like they're lacking the energy and the enjoyment that previous generation used to have, right? So it's like it's not completely lost to the general population that their lives are not getting any better. And I think that's why we're seeing all these autocratic regimes pop up. If this was something that the population would embrace wholeheartedly, then why do you need a police state to implement?
Yeah, you guys, maybe we do need to, like what we were talking about earlier, like, find some big piece of land, North Coast and start a commune, or at least band together like we're doing and continue this, because
I think this is feasible, but first the police state needs to collapse, because right now you're not safe anywhere unless you go to like some really deserted area where there's really no civilization, right? But that's kind of self-defeating. You don't want that either, right? You want to be able to have contacts with people, just not be clustered like sardines in a can, right? And right now, if you take a piece of land and go somewhere like in the rural California, martial law you'll still be subject to it, right? And in fact, as we've seen during the Great Depression, the government was actively looking, searching for these people. Some of them were hoarding up gold, some of them were hoarding up weapons, right? But the government is looking for these people that are out there, that are out of control, and they're capable of subverting the system. So until the police state collapses or is severely handicapped, I don't think just picking up and going to like a completely different area within the same country will do much good. I mean, they will come and find you. So the point is, we need a collapse to the point of the police state doesn't have enough resources to go and chase all the dissenters.
I was gonna say Ruby Ridge and then Waco are 2 more recent examples.
Yeah. Yeah, and as far as the Waco goes, I don't know if you watched the movie and like look at all the publications about it. These people weren't bothering anybody. It's simply the fact that this guy was such a charismatic leader. And if you look at like many of the investigations on Waco got classified, and nobody explained why. But there's some of the leaks that came about was basically that the FBI actually actively monitors the population, and whenever a capable and charismatic leader comes out of somewhere, right, they already have a plan of eliminating the person, like physically put him in jail or shoot him or whatnot.
If he's not CIA already.
Exactly, if he's not CIA. But that is kind of like the police state will not tolerate people who are capable of surviving independently. They want these servile serfs, right? People who depend on the state for survival. If you're out there, if you have your own solar batteries and water and whatnot, I mean, even if the police state doesn't come along, like if you're sufficiently close to civilization, these marauding crowds will probably come in and ruin your life anyways. So we're not there yet. But I think it's a good idea to start thinking about potentially having like a plan B, or like where would you go if the world as we know it collapses.
So I guess to be continued on what we're going to do.
And yes, to be continued, and keeping an eye on the situation and realizing that we're getting closer to such a scenario.
Well, you guys, if it's okay with you, let's do a couple more. And then maybe what we'll do is you come on in a month or two and do like a part 2.
Okay.
But I have a bunch of questions, but this has been great. Let's do a couple more. And then speaking of to be continued, we'll to be continued this game.
Awesome.
All right. My wife, she's wondering if it's okay for her and the boy to come home from the adventure.
Are they out there with chickens or not?
I don't know where they are now. They went on an adventure, which is something.
Admit it. You locked them up with the chickens. That's why the chickens are going berserk, because the kid is chasing them.
We call Bricks the chicken wrangler. He's actually great at getting the chickens in if we need to get them in for some reason, and they actually come up to him and let him hold them, and pretty cool. All right. Here's a question. Would you guys rather get you, Georgi, and you, Danny, and Ray on and this whole bioenergetic perspective? Because I think people are ready for something, right? I think a lot of people, we know some people are already ready for this, and other people I think are ready for this. Would you rather get yourselves on like Joe Rogan, which is a lot of a reach, or on the cover of the New Yorker with a big article?
I mean, I would probably go with the New Yorker. It has a much bigger reach and it's read by the masses, right? Joe Rogan is, as popular as he is, it's still a bit of a cult following.
Yeah.
So I don't know which one will spread more. I would say the New Yorker, especially if it's in print, because you'll tend to go to libraries and like get deposited in the areas where people will read it, right? With Joe Rogan, if it's like a one-time thing, especially considering the fact that he's more of a niche kind of like he's becoming mainstream, but again, how many people listen to Joe Rogan versus how many people read the Time magazine? I would say the latter one is in the hundreds of millions, because it's got a subscription base outside of the United States as well. So I will go with the latter, and I think the Time magazine has this aura of, if it's in Time magazine, it must be true, right? Well, if it's on Joe Rogan, maybe people will be like, no, this is just being done to incense the masses and generate viewership and ad revenue. But if it's in the Time magazine, it must be reality, right?
Cool.
I think I would go with Rogan just because, I mean, I think he single-handedly spurred interest in the carnivore diet. Like all the people doing that right now are either because of Jordan Peterson and him talking about it, or Sean Baker going on the show and talking about it. And so Georgi's right. There would be a skepticism. If Joe was doing keto, he'd probably push back significantly or whatever. But again, also the long form, like I don't know how long the article would be on the New Yorker or whatever, but the ability to explain precisely why I don't know, these views are less wrong than the keto people. Like, I think that would be really valuable too. And also I think his audience is probably more in line. Like is the New Yorker might gravitate to an older audience, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, more mainstream. So, but my experience is that people who read stuff in the New Yorker take it usually at face value and like don't even argue internally with it, right? It's like if it's there, because it's not, Time magazine is not something that really breaks through the news. In other words, it's not something that it's kind of like after the dust is settled, people have made their money, things have hit mainstream, then you read about it in Time magazine, right? It's like think of it as like a major event, like the election of Donald Trump, but you usually will read about it in the Time magazine 2 years later, like after everything has already been, talked about and done, and basically like it's part of reality now, right? While with Joe Rogan, I mean, it will generate a lot of controversy, but in terms of reach and people actually adopting it, yes, you'll have a very local, very vocal and fanatical support group, but you also have a number of people who'll be like, you know what? If Joe Rogan is saying it, I'm not even going to bother with that thing. It can go either way. If it's about doing the maximum amount of public good, and in terms of utilitarianism, I would go with Time magazine. If it's just to spread the idea and get people interested, then I think it would be the Joe Rogan, because it's got galvanizing effect, just as Danny mentioned.
And who knows? Maybe it's all going to happen. I mean, it seems to be that energy flows, and hopefully there's not a break in it. It just keeps going.
To be honest with you, right now, with everything that's been going on in people's lives, the last thing they need is some guy getting on TV or like Joe Rogan and saying everything you've been told about your health is a lie, and you're getting killed as we speak, and you're dying, and you need to wake up, because if this continues for much longer, you'll get a cancer down like 6 months down the road because you're holding that cell phone, next to your head.
For what it's worth, I've traded emails with people fairly close to him and other people like him. And so I'm not banking on this. I could care less, like if Georgi and I get 2,000 views on YouTube, I'm like, yes, this is awesome. Yes. And so I could care less, but like, it's not impossible. And because like some of those guys, especially like Tim Ferriss-y type people, they want to be progressive. They want to keep going. And I just think we've all done the keto thing, and it's so limiting, and there's only one direction to go. And so it just wouldn't be surprising if one of those people at some point was got into, right? For example, I'll occasionally type in Ray Peat with quotation marks in Twitter. And I think Ben Greenfield, who's like not on their level, of course, but like he's been on Joe Rogan. He's had interviews with Tim Ferriss and stuff. And he just linked it like a COVID interview with Ray Peat. And so even if those people aren't sincere and they just want to like piggyback on the kind of the novelty and uniqueness of Ray, like that probably wouldn't be a bad thing because they just have massive audiences.
Yeah, I agree. My wife was listening to one of the Ray Peat interviews on COVID-19, and she was like, how does everybody in the world not want to listen to this guy? Like, why does everyone not want to hear what this guy has to say?
Well, because of the investments you've made throughout your life. I mean, think of how emotionally, intellectually, and even financially invested people are like in the current medical structure. Like if you're paying $2,000 a month for insurance, like I am, because I'm self-employed, right, for the whole family, and I don't care. I'm just doing it just for the emergencies, right? God forbid somebody needs surgery, needs to go to the ER, right? Besides, actually, if we don't have insurance, the public schools in DC create a problem, so I'm forced to have insurance. But all the people that I know that are paying through their nose for their private insurance, imagine the reaction if you're telling them, I have to break it to you, but not only you're wasting your money, you're not going to get anything out of it, but your doctor is actually much more likely to kill you than a terrorist, a virus, and whatnot. I mean, just think of the reaction this would cause internally. Like you're sitting in a doctor's office, and that freak in a white coat that comes out is actually inadvertently much more likely to kill you than most of the things that can happen in this life. That's not going to sit well with most people. It can trigger like a significant mental breakdown, and they're not willing to do it. People have become it's not a done deal. I mean, this can change very quickly. But as of right now, many of these people are so so dependent on the system for their mental health. And by saying mental health is by creating this fake reality. Everybody's so dependent on it that if this thing starts to collapse, which is what we're seeing right now, we're going to go through a cataclysm or two before people start even asking the question, okay, now that all of this is fake, what is the alternative, right? I think that's why not more people listen to Ray right now is simply because the vast majority of people, they're not even close to the point where they're saying, okay, I suspect there is something seriously wrong with the system. Many people are like, I feel like something is not going right? But they kind of hoping like, oh, maybe it's just a glitch because of the virus. In 2-3 months, it will all go back to normal. If it doesn't go back to normal, I think that may be the catalyst, that may be the breaking point, which will make a lot more people than mainstream start looking for alternatives, and one of those alternatives will be Ray.
Yeah, that scientism, magic of science with a trademark, it is at the heart of the technocratic society. That is the all-knowing apparatus. So, yeah.
And you're forgetting, Danny, only certain people are chosen and allowed to do science. Neil
deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah. Or like Bill Nye, whatever his name is.
Bill Gates. Bill Nye,
yeah, Bill Nye, the science guy. So yeah. So maybe it'll hit the mainstream, but I think we're not at the breaking point yet. People are suspicious something is wrong, but not strongly enough for them to start looking for alternatives, and Ray being one of those alternatives.
Yeah. Well, perhaps we'll see. On that note, you guys, Ray's latest newsletter I thought was really good. He talked about Mei Wan Ho, right? No. He talked about Gilbert Lee. Sorry.
Gilbert, yeah.
And he talked about some of the mistakes that have been made in medicine and some of the people that have been allowed to practice science versus people who are revolutionary who aren't allowed to get their name out there. And I thought it was really, really powerful newsletter.
But look, all of these things, as true as they are, they're kind of like a vitamin pill. In order to get people to listen, you need to be selling a pain pill. And in order for the pain pill to be even considered, there needs to be pain, right? Right now, people are starting to feel pain, but they're not there yet. And actually, well, I shouldn't say that. Many of them are feeling the pain, but they're deluded, right? I mean, they have relatives dying from cancer and heart disease at a very young age, but they're being told that's how things are. But until things start to really breaking down to make people question the very reality that are being sold, right? All of these things that Ray says and writes about, as true as they are, many people will say, like, how does this affect me, right? It doesn't. You're not giving me the answers to, I'm not even suspicious of my reality yet for me to consider these alternative answers you're giving me. That first step, I think, needs to happen. Until then, I think Ray and in general, the metabolic theory will remain like a niche thing. And maybe it's a good thing, because the last thing we need right now is during emergency, state of emergency, for the government to be like, oh my God, these are the guys subverting the system. Let's go and round them up. So, yeah, but I don't want to say I'm optimistic. I think if it's going to happen, it will be now, because the reality for so many people is likely to collapse whether they like it or not. And unless the government has some hidden technology we don't know about to immediately manufacture a new reality and delude these people again, I think many of these people will be like, my God, all this economy, I've been told we're living in the longest bull market of ever. The economy is awash with money. Everybody's so rich, right? But I'm sitting here at home. I'm unemployed for like more than 2 months. No more government checks, no health insurance, nothing to eat. What the hell? What am I doing? So when we get to that point, I think we probably will. I think that's when we're going to start seeing some more questions, such as, if the government lied to me about the economy, what else have they lied to me about? And only a hungry, desperate person is likely to ask that question. A person sitting at home getting a 2-month paid vacation, they're not gonna. They're kind of enjoying this. I mean, like I said, some of my friends are like, "Why are you so worried about, like, why you keep posting this stuff on your blog, dude? Relax, you're getting paid to stay at home and do nothing," and they like it. There's nothing you can do to upset it. In fact, they get violent if you try to like spur some thought process. Be like, what do you think really is your doctor's process by prescribing Lipitor? They're like, I don't care. I'm getting paid. I'm, relatively feeling okay. Yes, I have a chronic condition. None of my relatives has ever had it, but who knows? It's just bad luck. So until that changes, we're not going to see a mass adoption of bioenergetic approach. But I think we're getting to the point where something will be adopted other than what's being sold right now, whether people like it or not.
There's like a men's movement, or it's like a nationalist movement too on Twitter, that they all like Ray Peat's ideas too. So it's like, again, it's taking on a little bit, and it's mainly on Twitter that I know of. But
it may go through roundabout ways, but we are seeing change. What is this men's movement? It's like men's rights?
It's not men's. It's like a nationalist. It's or maybe I'm mischaracterizing, but his name is Bronze Age Mantis, and he talks about the carrot salad and things, and a lot of people listen to him. So, yeah, and I think he wrote about him in his book as well.
I was starting to see, about the incel movement, like the involuntary celibate or whatever they call it themselves. So I was seeing some Ray Peat articles starting quoted on those forums, and I was freaked out. I'm like, damn, because everybody hates on those people, but a lot of the things that they say are actually pretty accurate. And some of the people that Ray mentioned, they've been starting to support the incel movement. So we'll see what happens. I just hope that this is not the group that picks Ray and starts running with him, because that may create like initial backlash. Everybody, they have such a bad image. But if you look at the things that they write, yes, they're taken to the extreme, but they're actually the people who are exposing a lot of ills that are currently in society simply because they have nothing to lose, right? Like if you're a person who, let's say, many of them are like, oh, I'll never get married, I'll never have a girlfriend, I don't have a well-paid job, I'm not good looking, right? I'm not like 6'5" tall, right? So all of these people that have nothing to lose, they're actually the ones that have nothing to lose to speak the truth, even if they're somewhat deluded. So I've starting to see some discussions on 4chan, and like they're quoting Ray Peat and basically saying like they're quoting some of his political articles too. They're saying like, well, because they were getting challenged by the mainstream 4chan community, saying like, you guys are just mentally ill, like you just because you don't have a girlfriend, that's making you believe in all these conspiracy theories. And I saw some responses quoting Ray's work saying like, what if the entire biology they've been told on which medicine is based, what if that whole thing is fake? What if what if mainstream medicine has no idea how the cell works, or the very least has been actively suppressing it? So we'll see. I mean, I'm seeing some larger groups of people using Ray to advance their own arguments. Maybe something good will come out of it.
I'm so curious. Let's do two more, you guys. Would you rather eat a sandwich made with shitty bread and drenched in mayonnaise, or eat a bucket of chicken fried in soybean oil?
The latter, because after the oil is oxidized, it's not nearly as dangerous.
Okay.
What was the first one? The sandwich with mayo?
Shitty processed bread with a ton of ingredients, drenched in mayonnaise.
And Georgi, you're saying that wouldn't be lipid process?
Oxidized PUFA is actually less dangerous hormonally, metabolically than raw PUFA that's still about to enter your body.
So you wouldn't eat the sandwich?
I wouldn't eat the sandwich. I would eat the chicken that's fried. Yes. So I mean, if you think about it, so after the peroxidation has happened, yes, these things are bad for you, right? But they will not get incorporated into tissues. You will not get as much of the PUFA becoming part of your cells in your fatty tissue. It will mostly be like a quick toxic effect, right? Because the malondialdehyde and many of the other peroxidation products, but with a decent liver function, even if it's not decent, in about 24 to 48 hours, you should be okay. While the mayo and all the other crap you ate from the sandwich will become part of you.
Because you're not stealing because it's already oxidized and you're not stealing the electrons that are jammed.
Yes. So yeah. Peroxidized PUFA is paradoxically stable, right? It's the other one that isn't, right? So it's
but why is the mayo stable? I guess I'm asking.
Well, I mean, I'm assuming it's not rancid, otherwise you wouldn't eat it, right? I mean, you're eating. So if it's fresh mayo put on a sandwich, excuse me, fresh mayo put on a sandwich with all these bad ingredients. So I'm assuming you're ingesting fresh PUFA. Between fresh PUFA and peroxidized PUFA is in fried food, I will take the peroxidized PUFA in fried food.
Okay. I missed the details on that question.
Now let's be clear. Neither of these is a good situation.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, I mean, you're choosing the lesser evil of two suboptimals, right? Yeah. Now, and here's the thing. Now, if you add the choice of like given vitamin E, then I would actually take the first option, because the fresh non-peroxidized PUFA combined with the vitamin E will be less dangerous than eating peroxidized PUFA even with the vitamin E, because the vitamin E wouldn't be protective in the latter case.
So this question has layers to it.
Yeah, as usual.
As usual.
You guys, let's do one more and then we'll call it and get on with our days. I know, Danny, you're like 11:30. You should be in bed sleeping, right? And Georgi got work to do. So
I mean, my wife hasn't called me yet. I'm assuming when I go home, it will either be complete disaster or everything's fine. So I really don't have any choice right now other than continue.
Awesome. Let me try to pick. I feel like I got some good ones that we aren't going to get to in this part, but that's fine. All right, let's do this one. If you were getting ready for a big debate or a big interview or a test that you thought was really important, would you rather have B1 thiamine or pregnenolone prior to your accessing information and speaking?
Georgi? Well, so here's the thing. One of them is a hormone, and many people feel like, for whatever reason, they don't want to be taking steroids, right? I would probably being myself, I would go with a pregnenolone, simply because I've tried both and I know their effects, right? But if you're asking this question to a generic person on the street, they'll probably go with a thiamine simply because they will be more concerned about taking a steroid, especially if they haven't taken it before. So as far as I'm concerned, because I've tried both and I know how both of them affect me, I will probably go with pregnenolone, but I would cap mine at about 30 milligram because I feel the best cognitive effect from no more than 50 milligram, and actually 30 seems to be working really well. Anything more than that, I get like very energetic, but it can come across as being hyper at an interview. And I know many interviewers actually don't want that. It's a sign that you're concealing inadequacy by being hyper and like throwing this energy in their face, when in reality, really, there's not much behind it.
I honestly don't have experience with either before an interview, and so I wouldn't know what to say. I'd answer protein seems to be the thing that can make a really bad interview or live stream, for me at least, yeah. or make it a lot easier to recall words and things. And that's the only thing that I thought really moved the needle whenever I would remember to do it.
Interesting. I remember first hearing Ray talk about it in an interview. It was probably 4 or 5 years ago, where he's talking about taking B1 before an examination, college.
A French test or something.
Yeah, and the performance was just markedly improved.
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence for pregnenolone too. I mean, I haven't been to interviews like and taken these things, but I'm speaking strictly for cognitive enhancement. Now, I don't know which one would work better under stress. Probably the pregnenolone, because the B1, it helps for cognitive function, but it doesn't have a very anti-stress effect. So if you're calm and you have to take an exam, but nobody's harassing you, nobody's putting you under fire and asking you 4 different questions between 5 people, then basically like the B1 will be fine, because all you need is raw processing power to pass the exam. In terms of maintaining good behavior and coherence under stress, I think pregnenolone really shines there. So for interview, even though I haven't done it myself, in other words, if I have to rephrase your question, handling cognitive load under stress, I would go with pregnenolone.
You know, can I change my answer to LSD? That's the thing I would want.
That was not an option, Danny.
Why, Danny?
Seriously, there evidence for both. Like you go to PubMed and type like thiamine cognitive function or pregnenolone cognitive function. Studies come up for both of them. So both of them have a good pro-cognitive effect. But I think only pregnenolone has a pronounced anti-stress effect.
Got it. All right. You guys, Danny, I'll start with you. And then Georgi, just in closing, where can we, and we'll do this later, maybe do a part 2, but where can listeners read more of your work or get in touch with you if they want to?
They should follow the YouTube channel. That's where Georgi and I do every other week live stream. And on the 25th, we're going to have Ray back on the show. This week, Emma Sarakis is going to join me, but that's the kind of platform for our continued show. We're only at like 20 something episodes. So we're just getting our feet wet, I feel like. So yeah, YouTube, Danny Roddy would be the best place, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah, for me, I have a blog. I usually post online under the moniker /alias Haidut, Haidut. So haidut.me, M-E is my blog. And I'm also on Twitter, like basically the same alias Haidut. And usually whatever I post, not usually, but whatever I post on the blog also gets immediately posted as a snippet on Twitter. So if you want to follow me, probably the best thing is to do it on Twitter. I used to answer a lot more emails individually, but now that this has gotten out of control, so I would prefer if people interact with me on Twitter because it's forcing them to keep things short, both in questions and in answers, and also other people benefit because it's a public discussion. I'm starting to dislike this whole email thing because a lot of effort goes into answering very individual questions, and then they stay locked into the mailbox, and nobody else gets to see those answers. So if other people ask me the same question or a very similar one, I may forget that I've answered it before, right? But when it's out there, to a degree, it's not always working, but people can at least search, and I encourage them to search if their questions have been asked before. So let's try to keep this as public as possible, both because the knowledge is shared and because it gives more credibility and exposure to these ideas. And the more exposed they are, the better chance that they will become mainstream. And we're going to see some really like large scale positive shifts in a good direction for the health of society, and not just health, just the way of society thinks and really handles itself.
I love that. All right, you guys, I'm super grateful that we all got to be able to get together and do this. So thank you for your time and your energy. And until next time.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Inviting.
Pleasure.
Awesome.